Feskerma Harden. We're going to do something unusual. We're going to start on time. Yeah. So, Feskerma. So, welcome to the Angus Macleod Memorial Lecture. Whether you're here at Park School in person or linking in via the live stream, and I'm sure there's people far and wide tuned in, as is normal. This is a special year, the 20th lecture in our prestigious series. But how time flies, my goodness. Who would have believed that when we started this 20 years ago that we would successfully get 20 lectures out? So well done, everyone has turned up. And many of you have been here maybe for all of the 20 lectures. And this is Community Land Week, which marks the progress made towards community land ownerships in Scotland over the last few decades, including, of course, here in Park. It's therefore doubly appropriate that our speaker tonight is Will Maclean, best known in Lewis as the designer of the impressive monuments throughout the island, which commemorate the heroes of the land struggle. Constructed by James Crawford, they have become a notable part of our landscape. But Will's reputation is by no means confined to Lewis. Will is Emeritus Professor of Fine Art at the University of Dundee and an internationally renowned artist and designer. He has won many awards for his artistic achievements, for example, the Saltire Society Award, the Civic Trust Award, and the Environmental Regeneration Supreme Award, and I know he'll mention some of these later in his talk. Only last year, his work, along with that of his wife, Marielle Levin, was the subject of a major exhibition, Compelled by Memory, in Edinburgh. It's therefore a great honour to have him with us tonight. Following the lecture, as is customary, there'll be an opportunity to put questions to Professor Maclean, followed by a vote of thanks, a short prayer, and a Gaelic psalm. That will conclude the formal part of the evening. You are then all welcome to stay behind for refreshments. Look at the publications available on the tables over there, including an illustrated booklet based on Will's lecture. And of course, meet up with all the new friends for a good chinwag. As always, we welcome your kind contributions as well, because we don't charge for these events. It's now a privilege to ask Professor Maclean to give the 20th Angus Macleod Memorial Lecture.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and thanks to John for his looking after me so well, keeping me on track. And so thanks for inviting me to deliver this very prestigious 20th Angus Macleod lecture. It's an honour and a privilege, just as it was for my wife Marion and I to have known Angus and Annie and to have had the pleasure of their friendship and hospitality over the years. I would like to begin by saying a few words about my own family background in Lewis, if you bear with me. Sometime in the spring of 1696, a boat from Skye landed under the castle in Stornoway. At the helm was Iondú Maclean, who was originally from the island of Mull. Maclean declared that he was related to the mistress Mackenzie of the castle, and he asked to meet her. She went to the boat and found that it was so. Maclean was told that he could settle anywhere he liked in Lewis, and he settled in Uig at Capital, now Ardroyal, and the family relocated across the beach to Crolista, where they established a fish curing business and traded with the Baltic right into the 19th century. And I'm grateful to Malky Maclean for supplying me with these bits of my family history. Now, Iondú had 6 sons, and one of them, Murdo, was my great-grandfather's grandfather. So moving forward in time, it was here in Graver that I first became enchanted with this island. In the summer of 1968, I was cook on the Calacan ringnet fishing boat, the Misty Isle, fishing for herring round Loch Shell. If we were not at the market, on the market run to Stornoway, we lay at anchor in Graver, and I vividly remember waking up on a summer morning and watching the sheep grazing on the wall heads of the thatched houses down near the shore. So I'm not sure what date this image is, but I know that these boats were the ringnet boats, and they used to lie at anchor and put up the small sails so they faced out to the sea. My first contact with Coinne Gaskich was a call from Roddy Murray at Atlanta, and to see him here tonight, who was asked if I would be interested in a project to design memorials to commemorate the Lewis land struggle. It transpired that a funding application to Gulbenkian Foundation in Lisbon required the involvement of a visual artist, and Roddy, along with Malcolm Maclean, put my name forward to the committee. My first contact with Angus Macleod was one that I'll never forget. On Tuesday the 3rd of December in 1991, I had a telephone call. A stentorian voice demanded, "Are you Will Maclean, the artist?" "Yes," I replied. "And where are you from?" I explained that my mother was from Calacan in Skye and my father was from Coiguch in Loch Broom. There was a pause, and then I added, "But my father, Macleans, were originally from Uig and Lewis." The voice became warmer. Well, boy, that's fine. When can you make a start?" So began a friendship with Angus and Annie that was to last for a lifetime, and a journey with Coinne Gaskich and subsequently related projects that continue to this day. It was a great privilege to be part of a project that has contributed to honouring the memory of the men and women who fought for the rightful ownership and culture of this island. So I begin with the Park Memorial here in the district of Loughs. It was the first project of Coinne Gaskich, and it was a project that was close to Angus's heart and his family home in Colbost. Now, in an appendix to the minute of information, for information to the committee of CNG, in a meeting held in the County Hotel in Stornoway, 31/1/92, Angus reported, "We met at Ballalam with Callum McRitchie Graver, Alistair MacLeod Ranish, and John M. MacLeod Ballalan. After examining the site, we retired to John M. Ballalan's home for hospitality and more discussions." The story of the people of Loughs is, I'm sure, well known to you all, but is such of significance that it's worth retelling. Over a long period of time, Lady Matheson, the proprietor of Lewis, ignored numerous pleas from landless families throughout Loughs for permission to return to some form of villages in Park, which their forefathers had been evicted. Instead, in 1886, she converted the former 24,000-acre Park sheep farm into a sporting deer forest. On the 22nd of November 1887, crofters and cotters from Loughs, having made their intentions public, marched into the park, into Park Deer Forest, led by pipers carrying flags. They confronted Mrs. Platt, the lessee, and her gamekeeper at Seaforth Head, and continued past them with calls of, "No English, my lady." So there were the ladies in question. The authorities reacted quickly, sending to Lewis detachments of the Royal Scots from Glasgow. The soldiers were greeted in Stornoway by Lady Matheson. Also, an abortive attempt was made to send HMS Ajax from Greenock with 400 men on board to subjugate the raiders. However, the ship broke her rudder in a gale off Ardnamurchan, and she had to be towed back to port. The raiders made their camp at Aridonheim by the shore of Loch Seaforth, and there they roasted and boiled venison. It was recorded that that evening was a scene of such an extraordinary character that there was no other in Highland history, at any rate since Culloden, to compare with it. On the second day, the sheriff and police chief read the Riot Act, and the raiders headed home. 16 men were charged with mobbing and rioting. 6 were sent to trial to the High Court in Edinburgh, and the jury took 30 minutes to return a verdict of not guilty on all charges. The verdict was received with loud and prolonged applause in the court. A victory was won in a long struggle. And we just move on to a slide of the Riot Act and the raiders returning. It's not going back for me. This is a slide of the drawings that, a composite drawing that I did of the design for Park. As with all the sites, the geography of the site selected is key to the development of the design. And the hilltop at Ballallan has views towards all the places of interest. It was important to the committee that the story should be told through markers and sight lines, so an internal staircase was needed to allow visitors to have a viewing platform, and the 3 entrances were in line with the cleared townships of Park, Kinloch and North Lochs. It was important always in my mind that at some point somebody would take a young son and daughter out for a run, and they would say, "What's that thing over there?" And that they would climb up and be able to tell the story to their children. Now at this point I'd like to acknowledge the role of James Crawford, stonemason, historian and archaeologist. Without his skill and dedication to the project, his ability to overcome problems that included my design, frankly, bad weather and availability of materials, the project would not have the highest quality that all the CNG memorials enjoy. And I would cite the example of the lintels at the entrance to the loch. There they are. James brought these stones by boat and truck from the shore, from the island shores, and to this day you can see these. He left the limpets attached. Now these are just details of the designs, and when, you'll know this if you've been to the site, it was important that these markers, stones, were able to refer to incidents, the reading of the Riot Act and towards Aridonheim. And the other interesting aspect was that some of the stones have numbers on them, and these were taken from the crofts and from the ruins of the crofts that had been cleared. The openings of all the events were very special, and this was the first one. And began with the sounding of conch horns in the morning and pipers leading the march to the memorials, the opening speech, symbolic roasting of venison, lunch in the hall, and the evening ceilidh where my wife, Marion, managed to draw her own ticket from in the raffle. The trouble was it was a bottle of whiskey and she put it back in the raffle instead of... The spirit of the event was recorded in photography by Sam Maynard. The children to the fore with their flags, and the marches from the hall led by the pipers and the family members of the crofting community. And bringing up the rear, there were members of the Scottish Arts Council. It's the children and the... One of the other extraordinary things about the opening was that I was invited to actually open it, and I can't remember in all the history of art events where the artist was asked to open it. It's usually the Lord Lieutenant or somebody important, but it was an amazing privilege to be asked to cut the ribbon. So we moved to the second project that I was involved in, and with CNG, the project in Agonish, opened 16th of August in 1896. I'll give you a moment to read the text. A full account can be found in Johnny Buchan's preeminent book, Nagaskich, The Lewis Land Struggle, and I would like to acknowledge the wealth of information that I've been able to refer to from her book. On August the 16th, 1996, the Agonish sculpture was opened with a day that will live long in my memory. A group of 200 people in costumes of the period, carrying red flags, marched from Babel School to the cairn, led by pipers, and a lot of them in period costume. And a lot of that was spontaneous. It wasn't something that was choreographed at an earlier date or rehearsed or anything. It was just a spontaneous. It was led by pipers, and the crowd formed an audience for a performance play, The Agonish Riot, which I think is still available on tape. And speeches were read, and John Mackay of Eagleton, whose father was one of the 13 imprisoned for taking part in the riot, unveiled the memorial. And it was hugely significant for his family because they told me later that the family didn't talk about the imprisonment because we felt it was a kind of slur on their reputation. So this was a moment of huge significance for them personally. So that's John opening it up and families with their red flags. The events in Agonish of 1888 in January was one of the most potentially disastrous confrontations of the period. The raiders, 400 in number, gathered at Agonish Farm on the Eye Peninsula, face to face with police, backed by Marines with fixed bayonets. Eventually, up to 1,000 people were involved. The Riot Act was read and greeted with derision. The Royal Scots arrived and took the arrested men to jail. The crowd hurled stones and clods at the retreating columns. Subsequently, the men were taken to Edinburgh, and various sentences were passed by Lord Craig Hall. The verdicts were posted in Stornoway, and the news caused anger and dismay among the population. Joni Buchanan refers to the fact that the people of Point had to wait for another 17 years for a final victory, when in 1905 the farm of Angus was divided into 32 crofts. And as she so eloquently comments, they churned the milk, but it was the next generation that tasted the butter. That was the play. The design of the construction presented significant problems for James Crawford, and he overcame them by having a metal framework constructed to give complete accuracy for the shapes. The images of confrontation are expressed by the two columns of stone, 15 feet in height, one faced with jagged, pointed stones representing the Marines' bayonets, and the other rounder stones of the crofters' missiles. The stones reflected the aggression and the tension of the event. So that was the tent structure that Jim erected. One of the continuing factors that would have been a great source of satisfaction to Angus is the fact that this memorial continues to be a relevant feature within the community. And this year it was lit up for Armistice Day. An image has been the image of it has been incorporated in the logo of the Point and Sandvik Trust. And from my point of view, the local nickname of it is Jaws. So if we move to the Gress Memorial in the district of Back, this memorial commemorates the events following the First World War, when returning servicemen took the law into their own hands and claimed the land that the government had promised them. Conflict arose when Lord Leverhulme bought Lewis and Harris in 1918. He planned to industrialise Lewis and opposed the Board of Agriculture scheme to divide some of the farms into crofts for the landless families. Leverhulme's action divided communities and even families, and Nigel Nicholson's book, Lord of the Isles, gives a detailed account of the conflict between Leverhulme's ambitions to turn Lewis and Harris into a centre of industry and the commerce and industry and commerce and the traditional way of crafting life. And this is Leverhulme in the middle there, and with his big hat on, and some of his plans for turning Lewis into a utopia, Leveropolis. The monument at Gress Bridge is at the site of the confrontation between Leverhulme and the raiders on the 12th of March, 1919. Leverhulme stood on a upturned barrel, and addressed the crowd of over 1,000 and promised a 5 million investment in the island. Leverhulme's flow was interrupted by a local man, Alan Martin, who spoke in Gaelic. "Now, this will not do. This honey-mouthed man will have you believe that black is white and white is black. We are not concerned with his fantasies. We want the land, and I want to find out from him, will he give us the land? Lieberhume's reply was, no, I will not give you the land. Oh, these are out of sync. So this memorial took the form of two curved stone structures intersected by stone columns and built on a raised mound and surrounded by an earth rampart. And the stone structure, in a way, referred to the split in the community created by Lieberhume. And the earth rampart referenced the trenches of the war and the returning soldiers. And again, the outlying curved stone structures posed problems for James Crawford. The stone in the center was, to my mind, a kind of reference to the man himself. And at the opening, the photographer, although I hadn't made that at all public, when the opening ceremony was there, the photographer grabbed a hold of me and he said, go up and stand beside the Manny. So he recognized that the kind of reference to Lieberhume himself, and the stone was different. The outside were pebble stones and the inside was stones, cut stones, just to kind of try and reinforce that kind of reference to the difference in cultures. The opening was different, a kind of event. It was more understated than the other two, and it had a religious element that was more prominent than in the other two, although the children were fully involved, and a bouncy castle was erected to provide great attraction. This was always an amusement to Angus because it was a photograph captured by the Scotsman photographer, and Angus commenting at the time that he had to learn a whole series of new dance steps. So I finally come to An Solachan. Celebration and commemoration. This was a project that was commissioned by the Valtas Community Trust. The project leader and administrator in Uig was Donella MacDonald. And the brief was different from the others because it was hopefully looking forward as well as looking back, because the land was, we wanted to develop something that could honor the past, but also could be used in some way to celebrate the future, and so that people might go there and wonder why they went there. And Donella told me today that frequently they have events where they go up and light a fire and take some refreshment with them. And the last one there was one of the schools' council, and I can't imagine anywhere else in the country that the schools' council will go up to have their meetings in such a place. The site chosen lent itself to the idea of the linking to historical times. It had two outcrops that could be linked by a stone passageway and an archway of stone. So reports of unrest in South Uig began in the 1880s. And in 1884, a force of Marines arrived in Loch Ruag to arrest 8 men who were tried and imprisoned for placing stock on offshore islands and deforcing the sheriff officers. Raids continued through 1913-14 and 1920-21. And in 1921, the land of the Balthus Peninsula was restored to the people. It was important to us that the structure had a name that reflected all the aspects of the brief and not just a memorial as such. And the committee approached Finlay and Norma Macleod, and they gave us the gift of the name Ansulachan, which orbits around the word sul in Gaelic for eye, but extrapolates out to eye-opener and noteworthy and even prescience and far-seeing. And so it has a rich connotation looking to the future as much to the past. And it's been so important that name has given the kind of, how am I doing for time? So that was the link when you went in first, the names of the raiders were there, and you walked through the archway. On the other end, there's a brazier. That's one of my wife's drawings, original drawings for it. And that was Jim Smith, the builder, who made such a fantastic job. The work was constructed by Ian Smith, who built the walls and the circles, and the brazier was formed from old school raisings by the Stornoway blacksmith John Macleod, woodwork by John Angus Macleod, and groundwork by Donald John MacDonald. All the drawings for all the works were considered and presented to the planning boards by John Norgrove, who were grateful for his support on this project and on the others as well. And we would like to thank the Mackay family of Reef, Tenori for his advice, patience and support, and Katrina for always making sure that we were fully sustained. So the fire basket was mounted on an old mill wheel. The seating around it was designed so that inside and outside of the wall, so there would always be somewhere, if you went there, that would be sheltered and out of the wind. But actually, when the fire's going and it's not too midgy, it's a really quite a cozy place to sit around. Now, the center arch was a reference to the Inuxit, which can be found throughout the circumpolar world. They're a stone doorway through which the shaman enters the spirit world. So we saw our archway as a linking portal between the past and the present. So these are the actual Arctic doorways. So by an amazing act of knowledge and good fortune, James Crawford found these stones. Now they'd been quarried and partially worked and abandoned in Loch Ruag. Who can say where they were quarried or what was their original purpose? They were there just waiting for Jim to come across them. And that's Jim and his son working to bring them up above the high water line. So the first circle as you come in, as I mentioned, were the names of the raiders, and they were carved in granite. And that was quite an important element in the opening. So I'd like to end with a note that is important to me. That a lot of the awards that reflect that the work was given are a reward for all the people that were involved and committed to these projects, but they also confirm the fact that these memorials and sculptures have a national and an international context. So they're more than just local artifacts. So they did receive a number of awards, and Donnie mentioned them earlier, the Environmental Regeneration Supreme Award, Civic Award, Civic Trust, Salter Society, and they were shortlisted for the Marsh Award for Excellence in British Sculpture, which is a very, very prestigious British award. And they were nominated for the European Union Nostra Award for Cultural Heritage. This year, the former British Museum and National Director Neil McGregor, in a recent programme on Radio 4, The Museums That Make Us, chose the Agnish Farm Raiders Memorial Drawing in the museum at Museum Newellen and Stornoway as his first choice of 5 objects that he believes best represent how British museums help shape our future. And the National Geographical magazine have recently cited An Sualchan as one of the top attractions in the UK. Thank you. Happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Put your hand up, please, if you wish to use it.
I'm exhausted, you all.
There's an amazing amount of stone used in these monuments, and where did all the stone actually come from? I know that was James Crawford's role, but...
Well, it's a variety. I mean, certainly it was all donated for a start. There were none of the stone for any of them, to my knowledge, was purchased. It was all donated. It was donated by people within the individual communities, and An Sualchan's a case in point where there were people that had ruins on their crofts said, you can take these stones. We're very fortunate.
And some of them are quite rounded, so did they come from the shore?
Yeah, they were some of them were beach stones. And
Yeah.
Jim organised that. But we wanted they couldn't be completely freestanding, so we tried to get the cement work pushed right in so that it didn't look as though they were cement.
Yes.
Cement was to the fore, so he scraped back the cement as hard as he could. So they remained strong, but the cement wasn't evidenced.
And what was the typical build time for one of them? What was the typical build time for one?
I don't know, Nari, what do you think? How long did it take? Yeah. Yeah. So it took, they were about a year each one building.
Okay, we have a question.
Thank you for that. That was a lovely presentation. What I wanted to know was, after your first initial phone call from Angus where he established your pedigree. Were you then subjected to an avalanche of letters, as most of us were who were involved in the Angus Macleod orbit at that time, directing us and questioning us and goading people on? Or did he leave you to get on with it? And then what was his response when he actually saw the final things?
He seemed to be, well, the first point about the letters, yes, I've got a file that as thick as that, and a lot of it is still, I couldn't share it, I couldn't publish it, because some of the people, yeah, the redactions would be pretty enormous. But, but he was enormously supportive of any ideas that I put forward, but some of the first ideas were modified. I think maybe Roddy could remember that, put some ideas forward that either didn't work or weren't practical, and so there was coming and going with the ideas until we got going.
This is more of a comment than a question. We recently in the commemorate had a visit from some professors from the south of England, and one of them asked about the cairns, and we ended up taking them round, all of them, and explaining what they were. And on his final night, he described them as the best monuments to insurrection in Western Europe.
My thanks for that. But again, as I say, in all these projects, I was just, and what was really unusual and delightful for me as an artist, that up until that point, my activity as an artist, I'd go to the studio and make art, and it was a pretty solitary activity. But in the mall, I was just part of a team of people. I was the artist, and Angus used to say, well, that if something came up, he'd say, well, you better ask the artist about that, if it was relevant to the design. But it has to be said, particularly, with Ansulachan, it was just so much a community involvement. And if these projects had been parachuted into as an Arts Council structure, the community would have been outraged. But because they were there, because the community wanted them, because they were relevant to their own history, then that's if there's success, that's where the success lies, in my opinion.
Hi, I was wondering now whether there's any plans to do any sort of memorials of the many community trusts where the land has actually at long last ended up in the hands of the local community, whether there are any projects in line to commemorate this, or whether it's something that does need to be commemorated from now on.
Well, with your permission, may I mention the fact that in future there will be a memorial or a structure or a construction in Galston, and the brief there has been to just that, to commemorate the communities that have been returned to their rightful ownership. So watch out for Galston next year. It's a biggie.
Anyone else?
I didn't know if I got the nod from Angus, so it's all right to talk about it. There's another project that Maria and I are working on in Coigach, which is again to commemorate in this case the women of Coigach who were at the forefront of the 5 different attempts by the sheriff officers to serve summonses on the crofters, and each time they were rejected. And on one occasion they were stripped. The sheriff officer was stripped naked and put back in the boats and sent packing. And a few years later, somebody wrote a pipe tune called "The March of the Cold Testicles." So that's a very interesting one, because it's, apart from the fact that it highlights the roles of women in the resistance movement, it also sent a signal to the Cromarty Duchess that they just couldn't get away with it. And it rebounded quite badly, I think, on the people of Easter Ross, when she said, on record as saying the people in Coigach, this is not being allowed to happen again. So she was hard on the Grignards people, but Coigach, it's an amazing story, and it's one that's been largely untold. One of the few successes of resistance at that period of time.
Thanks very much, Will, for the talk. And I had the privilege last year of seeing your exhibition in Edinburgh, which really showed your own work and Marion's, and particularly this work, in a fantastic space. And it was wonderful to kind of look over the shoulder of people looking at these structures and commenting on them and kind of trying to eavesdrop on the conversation. Really fascinating. I wonder if you'd like to say a bit. You mentioned Súlachan and the importance of the name of Súlachan, and I know that the structure in Coigach has a very, very evocative name, and indeed in Golson you were very, very insistent from a very, very early stage that we find a name, and we were fortunate to do that. And I just wonder why, if for somebody who's a visual artist, why is the name so important?
Well, I think the importance of it is that with Cynnig Nagaskich, it was a very specific thing. It was the reference is quite specific to an event, and the thinking was that it should relate to that event. But when you come to An Súlachan, for example, we wanted the name to reflect the future as well as the past. And once you pin something down with a name like, oh, that's the cairn, or that's the memorial, or that's this, or that's that, it in a way reduces in your mind, it reduces the potential for broadening your understanding of what the thing can be about. And I mean, Súlachan, I mean, I'm sure that Donella will support me in saying that when people go and they wonder what that name is about, and it makes them think and try and inform themselves about various other dimensions outside it being just a memorial to the names of the people. So that's why with Coigach it's called An Lorg, the footprint of Coigach. It's and again, we had the same debate, and within the community themselves came up with that, a short list of things, and then they decided on Lorg because it had that generalization that I'm trying to express.
Anyone else?
Give tired. You're needing a cup of tea.
In that case, I shall take a seat. Will. Go on to the next one. Okay, I'm here to propose a vote of thanks, and it's going to be in two parts. First of all, Will, but secondly, to the community and everyone that's helped to make this event possible. So, starting with Will, when I first started coming to Lewis in the early 1970s, I'd never heard of the Park Deer Raid or even the Lewis land struggle. And after I did come to Lewis in 2000, or started living in Lewis, I found out from neighbours of my generation that many of them didn't really know anything about the Park Deer Raid. They'd never been taught that at all in schools, for example. They'd hardly even heard about the clearances. And I reflect on that in my experience back in the 70s. And even, I think, local people at the time didn't really speak much about the land raids. And as Will said in his lecture, some of the families were slightly embarrassed because their relatives had, in some cases, gone to prison. Well, they'd been taken to court anyway. And I reflect the huge difference from that era in the 1970s to today, where we have these wonderful monuments celebrating the heroes of the land struggle. And that complete change in the narrative is due to several people, but particularly to, first of all, to Angus Macleod, whose memory we are marking and celebrating this evening, because he was really didn't do it all on his own, but he was the leading force in the Kynachan and Gascoch movement and has completely changed the narrative. And of course, the inspired choice of Will Maclean as the designer, again, there were others involved, James Crawford, John Norgrove, but Will was the main designer and must take the main credit, I think, for these fantastic monuments that are renowned, not just in Lewis, but internationally. So this sea change, really, in the way that the land struggle is viewed, I think is a huge tribute to people like Angus Macleod and Will, that people, tourists, for example, travelling from Stornoway to Tarbot or vice versa, it's difficult for them to escape the Park Cairn, and they stop and have a look at it. So far from this being a hidden chapter that no one spoke about or they were slightly embarrassed, these are now absolutely celebrated. They've become a major part of the whole landscape of Lewis. So I think that is in itself is a tribute, I think, Will, to yourself and to Angus Macleod. And we are so privileged to have had you here this evening because you're not just a local designer, a local practitioner, if you like. You have an international reputation, and we appreciate your coming here. So I'm going to go on to the community side in just a minute, but could I ask everyone to put their hands together and thank Will for his fantastic contribution. Right, secondly, this event would not be the way it is if it wasn't for the help of a huge number of people, even people that the ghost that closes the door. All our events, all of the Angus Macleod lectures are absolutely community events, and I hope you can stay behind afterwards. A large number of people, I just want to go fairly quickly through everyone. First of all, the Collier for the use of Park School and the IT support that they have given us. Also the Community Council for funding towards this event, and in particular Councillor Angus Morrison, who has facilitated this latest round of funding through the Community Council. The Nicholson family, who are here in just about full force this evening. Ian in particular at the back there, who not only Ian and Angus, I think, have brought all the chairs up here from Oronsay Hall. Ian has driven the bus from the church car park, doing a shuttle service for those that are parking their car there with the agreement, and I'm very grateful to him. Also, the bus that is used is Angus Morrison's bus, so tremendously grateful to Ian and Angus for all their support in doing all that and setting up the room here. Mary McDowell, who's not here, but Angus is here, and she, I think, looked after Will and indeed Malky earlier this evening, and Will is staying their bed and breakfast, so thank you very much to the McDowells. Jack Wolfe, who's anonymously sitting there at the back, but he's been live streaming the whole event, and as far as I can see, that has worked very well. Park Free Church, Reverend Ian McCritchie wasn't able to be here tonight, but he and the church session have given us use of the car park, so thank you very much to them. David Simpson and Mark Griffiths, who seem to have disappeared, but they were the people you may have met at the road end on traffic duty. Christina, who's going to help with the books in just a moment, including the sale of Will's booklet. There it is, which is being sold for the first time this evening. Common Actory production, price £8, a snip. So that and other books are for sale later on the table over there. Donnie, who's chaired the whole event and has done so many other things. He's produced this booklet, for example, and organised so many things. So in addition to them, and we now come on to the bit of the programme we've yet to enjoy. I thank in advance Murdo Macleod, who is in a moment going to give us a short prayer and introduce the Gaelic Psalm, by which we will end the event and indeed present the Gaelic Psalm. So very, very grateful in advance to Murdo for doing that. And then at the end of the evening, after the formal part, Ishbel and her team of helpers have produced this fantastic spread you see on the table over there. So please stay behind and chat and take advantage of the cups of tea, coffee, and all the goodies you see on that table. If I've missed anyone out, I'm sorry, it's not deliberate, but this is a genuine community event. I think you can see from that how many people have been involved. So I'd like to thank everyone and ask you to join with me in thanking all the community members. Thank you.
O eternal and ever blessed one, we are thankful for the privilege of being here tonight. And Lord, we thank thee that we are amongst those who were friends and are still friends with us in this life. And we thank thee, Lord, that we tend to think backwards as the more we go on in life, thinking of other days, happy days in our lives. And we are indeed, we know that we had happy days when we lived here. And we know that things change, and all is not a change for the better. But we thank thee, Lord, that thou art free from all changes. The endless years to last for thee. When we find thee, Lord, we find peace and comfort for time and for eternity. Oh, bless us all gathered here tonight, Lord. We thank thee for it. And thou knowest that we care and love for this place. And we thank thee for the memories we had of Angus Macleod, and who such a help he was to us as a community. And for his recording many things, Lord, that we still think of. Oh, bless us now, Lord. Be with us as we come to the end of this night. Be with us as we sing thy praise for Christ's sake. Amen. We'll sing in Gaelic in Psalm 73. Psalm 73 in Gaelic, and the tune is Kilmarnock. Go hackemans yn efen hwys a hwys y gyr yn ôl. Is chanelniach tal o ffos a hwys y fel mo gŵr. Mo chris fiol faryn y taith farnach o gynsycht. Geir synias mo chdi y dias, mo chair yn bwyn yn fest. Go hackemans yn efen hwys. Go hackemans yn
Thank you very much. That's the end of the formal part of the evening. Help yourself to tea and coffee now, and the usual social part that is so much part of the enjoyment of the evening, chatting. Okay, thank you all for coming. Thank you.